Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Khaled Azar with us, who is the founder of Livmo, a business brokerage for SaaS and digital businesses. Fun fact, one of the businesses Khaled represented actually was sold recently to a member of the SMB Deal Hunter community, which is great. And very excited to have Khaled here to talk about small business acquisitions through a broker's lens. So Khaled, it's really great to have you on today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I love your community, love your newsletter, so I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Look, let's start with your background, which I think is a little different from most brokers out there. Love to learn sort of how you got into the space.
Yeah, so I grew up as a kid coding websites before I was part of the first '01 bubble crash, so I'm a digital kid. Growth hacker before it was cool. I used to pay other kids to watch the wrestling shows. They would write down who won. I'd post it on my website as a spoiler before it aired on TV, and I got millions of hits that way. Fell in love with digital, businesses that way. From there, over the last 20 something years, I've built some, scaled some, bought some, sold some, failed some. And yeah, in those transactions, it felt like there was a little bit of a disconnect of when people represented me. And so that's why I launched a firm. As any good entrepreneur does, they go, I think I can do this, if not slightly better, a lot better. And so you launch your own firm and you take a shot at it. So that's how when I decided to build the firm.
Love that. What are can you share some examples of, transactions that you guys have done?
Yeah. I personally sold, like, I had an office furniture company, so I've done non-digital as well. I mean, it was my own company. I ended up selling that. I sold a B2B marketing SaaS that I built and then sold. And those are some of my personal transactions. Um, Transactions as a firm, one good one is a HubSpot SaaS company. So they were a HubSpot customization agency and then developed a texting software that plugs into HubSpot. And we were able, because they had recurring revenue, we got them a pretty good valuation and a good exit. 3.5 million or so for that one. What's a really good one? A gentleman had been building a kids education app because he had kids who, when he was looking at the App Store, saw, okay, they're either learning and it's really just too much learning, or it's gaming and they're not really learning anything. And he made one that's a combination of both, and it was really good. I played it and did it. And he was doing, a good seven figures a year in revenue. And yeah, we were able to get him eight figures for his kids education app. And so that one was really nice as well. We've done IT staffing, digital agencies, e-commerce, anything digital we dabble. We sometimes even will do non-digital depending on the type of business, but those are some of the transactions. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations on all your success. I'm sure it's tough to start a business brokerage of your own, especially when, there's so many out there. I'm curious though, what is sort of your process like and just in general, when do people approach you? Do you approach them? What stage of sort of their business's life cycle are they sort of coming to you? And then, how long does it take for you guys to then prep a deal or even sign them as a client?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing to understand is this is a potentially a life-changing transaction, depending on the size of the business, and it's not done that often, meaning that it's one of those moments in life where, you maybe might do it once, two or three times if you're just a serial entrepreneur. So it's a very big, how, like, when you're thinking about sales and marketing, think about low ticket sale items, high ticket sale items. This is like the highest. And so the channel that generally works the best is referrals. That's why referrals are just so big in the industry, because it comes with a human trust level, right? And so we find referrals are the best way we get to meet other business owners, right? I get on a call with a business owner who maybe did come in through an ad campaign or a email or a podcast, and then they go, Khaled was great. He gave me a lot of education. You should talk to him. And so, believe it or not, even that initial marketing creates those referrals. So th those referrals are generally the highest way. If we're, the new kid on the block, which we are, the question is, how do you build that trust or connection without maybe that personal referral yet? Well, the way I do that is with genuine connection and content, right? Um, I want to give so much value that it feels painful if you don't work with me. You're like, there's no way I can't work with you because you gave me so much information that I would be foolish to go with someone else. Um, I don't hard sell either because the last thing I want to do is create this friction between my potential clients and I. And now they feel like I've oversold them. And when we go through turbulent times, which does happen when you're trying to sell a business, for one reason or another, we're at odds. We need to feel like it's almost like a marriage. Like if we don't feel united when we kind of go into those vows together, there could be friction in the relationship. Um, so we still do content marketing. So everything else works, but referrals generally work the best. And then referrals from centers of influence. So other M&A lawyers, brokers, maybe in different industries, accountants, etc. Um, Once we get that referral, we are going to look under the hood of the business, as well as the type of owner to see if it's going to, again, work out. Again, I very much compare it to a marriage. So I'm like, okay, is it going to be healthy for us to engage with each other? Um, and then we start just looking at the health of the business. Do you have accurate financials? How wrapped is it around you? We have a sort of a checklist and a process that we go through. There are more commonalities in the health of a business than there are differences by niche, right? So what I mean by that is a lot of people come and say, well, have you ever sold a manufacturing company? I can tell you, it's not going to take me that long to understand manufacturing, but the things that I look at to make sure you're a healthy business, whether you're a SaaS, a manufacturing company, a contractor, a roofer, IT, again, commerce, agency, whatever it is, those are pretty consistent, right? I mean, I can give you those 12 things right now. Again, give or take some on the list depending on the type of business. But so we're looking at that. We're saying, okay, is this a healthy business? Should we engage with them? What is the seller's expectations? That we fight through quite a lot, right? Oh, I mean, I had somebody recently come to me and go, oh, my business is on a downward trend. We have about 700 or so K in ARR, and we'd like 3 million, right? So that's one, two, three, four, about 4x revenue on a SaaS that's trending downward. Um, that's difficult because you're trending downward. You're asking someone to buy something that's on its way to potentially dying if they don't turn it around in a space that's actually difficult now because a lot of big players have come into it. So it's a very much a conversation, it's a dance, it's an engagement of a relationship. If the expectations are good based off the health of the business, we get into an engagement and we go into onboarding, prepare the data room, the SIM, the financials. We do it a lot more intense than other people. Just to be clear, as a techie, I'm very product and process driven. So we go, even for the smaller listings, we go pretty deep on them. Then we take them to market, vet the buyers, negotiate, try to get as many LOIs as possible. We don't just look at the enterprise value. We look at the buyer's profile. Do they have access to capital? Are they okay to work with? Again, it's another marriage here because now my client, the seller, is going to have to be involved with this person for some period of time. Sometimes it's just a few months to do the transition, but sometimes it could be a year. So you don't want them to be at odds necessarily, but I'm generally the person that's negotiating on behalf of the seller because I don't want the seller and buyer to have that much friction. So I generally will deliver bad news or create friction amongst me and the buyer. It's better to have it than the seller and the buyer. Um, and then yeah, hopefully we get a good deal, we enter due diligence, and wait for the wire to land.
Love that. And what is that timeline like usually from like the first conversation with a seller to when a deal actually closes? What have you seen that look like on your end?
Yeah, that's going to correlate positively with the health of the business, right? So the healthier you are, combined with the listing price, right? So the healthier you are, the more accurate fair market value, or even slightly under it you come, the faster we're going to sell you. Right? Healthy business, price right, is going to sell in from the day I talk to you, like you just are interested. If you sign right away, we build the data room, and I'm trying to get you a wire, 6 months. So in under 6 months, you'll be fully out of the business. From the moment you sign, about 5 months, and that's aggressive. That's very, very fast. You could go faster. The kids app I sold in 5 months, but we moved quickly. He signed right away. Took us about 2.5 weeks to build the data room. We only listed it for less than 30 days, and the closing time from the LOI was 45, and the buyer had access to 8 figures in cash. And so he wired that immediately. There was no calling of the partners or SBA or anything like that. So there are scenarios where it goes very quickly. I've also had a client who we overpriced because that was the valuation was we made some mistakes on that. I was, it was a different time and it was with a different firm. And we thought the industry was much hotter. It's not uncommon. But we ended up we went under LOI. That LOI lasted like 6 months. They kept renewing it. The person that was going to buy it couldn't afford it. We had to go off the LOI, take it back to market, lower the price. They were burnt out. The whole thing took 18 months. So, you know, it wasn't that it was an unhealthy business. It was more of a product than a business. They had built something, they generated revenue from it. They had no systems, no operator, no contracts with some clients. And so they were selling this. It was a concept with revenue more than it was a product, but not a business. And I think people need to differentiate that. Are you selling a product or are you selling a business? Because a business has a lot more check boxes.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I know when we sold our business, it took probably a year start to finish, and it definitely was much longer than you probably set out to. I mean, someone who's never sold their business before, you probably just assume, oh, this is like a 3 month process or it's super fast. And I think on the buyer side too, if you're not an experienced buyer, like I'm gonna buy a business in the next 60 days, and it's like, wow, you're in for a ride.
Well, what's the comparison? Like a house. That's the closest thing we can compare to. A house, you decide on the house, you put it in escrow. There's maybe some 60, 90-day escrow, whatever it is, and then you're like, oh, I got it. You think business is the same way. And it's just like, no, there is it's a much more intense back and forth nuance there. Yeah.
That's a really good point, sort of the comparison to a house, because I think that is the closest sort of data point that people have. No, that's really interesting. I'm curious, how do you educate sellers on valuation? Because I'm sure that's one of the, pain points you probably see when you're talking to folks who don't know how their business should be valued. Do you see that as
Yeah.
being something that's a friction point a lot?
Yeah. I study behavioral economics as a hobby. I love understanding human bias, decisions, heuristics, etc. We very much in this space, sellers tend to have survivorship bias. So they'll look at the things they have access to that have survived and meet the criteria that they want to see. So they'll go, da-da-da sold for da-da-da, this much. And I have to go, okay, are you da-da-da-da, right? Like, are you that healthy, right? And so the best way to do it is to show them comparables, right? Show them the graveyard. I say the graveyard, but they're not businesses that died. It's just the larger data set. And I go, look, I know you think it's worth this much, but the last 10 transactions of an e-commerce company in the last 12 months, when they had these types of risk or value profiles, sold for this much. So as much as you want to sell it for this much, it's probably not going to get sold. And that goes back to the question, well, how long is it going to take? Or what's the likelihood of it selling? And I always tell people, the more aggressive you price it, the more you've decreased the likelihood of it closing, right? So that has sort of a negative correlation. The more aggressive you are, the less likely it's going to actually close.
I'm curious with sort of reason for sale, since you represent a lot of digital businesses, I think,
Mhm.
a lot of the sellers, I'm assuming, are are not just like retiring business owners.
Yeah.
How do you think through that and whether or not they're actually serious? And, for example, like why would they sell this business for, maybe 3 to 4 times EBITDA or something like that? Why not just continue to run it for a couple of more years? And especially when your guys' commission is sort of tied to that as well. How do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we do generally deal with a younger group of people. Not, I mean, I have someone who's like 27 right now who's built their first SaaS and they're interested in exiting out of that. So some of it is just the um, need to do something else due to age, right? They're just like, oh, they have shiny object syndrome. I built this, it's been 3, 4 years. Not only that, they didn't meet VC criteria. Oh, I didn't scale it to be a semi-unicorn, a unicorn. I failed. I should go do something else, right? So that's one reason. Also, in general, tech deprecates fast, right? Like we're in an industry that, like if I'm a roofer, I'm probably going to be able to do roofing the same way for the next 15 years. Like I don't see roofing getting disrupted or but if I'm building an influencer platform when influencers can buy and sell it to each, well, now with the rise of AI, maybe actual influencers aren't as important. So there's just this in the digital space, there's just a younger crowd who want to do other things. I mean, younger, even I mean, I'm 40 and I've been doing it 20, seriously, since I was 16, right? So, and I've done a dozen digital businesses. So it's just the nature of the industry that we're in. It's the exponential growth of tech, and that matches the output of businesses to be sold. So, some of them also just want a normal job. Some of them have kids and want to just, so there's all those other reasons why, but it's that hockey puck of tech innovation that creates an output of businesses to be sold.
I'm curious, you brought up AI. How has sort of the rise of AI in just, the past year affected
Yeah.
sort of the entire ecosystem from your lens?
Yeah. So first of all, so there's this like debate right now that's going on about is AI eating up SaaS? And I actually just saw a video on it yesterday. I forgot the name of the Salesforce CEO, Mark, I believe it's Mark Bainoff, something like that. Forgive me if I'm getting it wrong. But he was speaking about how eventually the user experience layer is going to go away. So we'll just be talking to agents. And so the agents, I'm even having a hard time grasping that. So let's say I'm in the CRM and I want to do something to a lead. I'm in HubSpot doing that. Do I just talk to them? Hey, the traffic source is this. This is where the lead is. They just did this, they just did that. So I bring all that up to say one of the industries where, you know, market makers in is SaaS. And I do think right now there's going to be an exodus out of it. Like, hey, if you have a traditional UX SaaS and you haven't integrated some AI, you probably want to get out as soon as possible. Or integrate some AI, and even then, that's probably just going to make you attractive enough to sell pretty quickly. Um,
How
it's
are
a
buyers thinking about that from your perspective? Are buyers a little bit more, I guess, allergic to, SaaS businesses as a result, or what are you seeing there?
Yeah, again, it boils down to the health of the business, right? So if the business is healthy and the churn isn't crazy, um, they're generally pretty optimistic about it, right? Buyers are looking at ROI. They're saying, okay, if I spend 1 million, 2 million, 4 million buying this thing, am I pretty sure I'm going to get this back over a period of time? AI or no AI. Once they're kind of sure that it's within the realm, then they add the AI component to go, okay, is that going to disrupt me in the next couple of years? Yes or no? And so I think, I mean, if they're a sophisticated buyer, they're doing that analysis themselves. I think the same way the seller is looking to mitigate risk and keep the business healthy, the buyers I would assume, are looking at it the same way. Um, so I think buyers generally look at it more about the health and the investment of the business from a financial standpoint. Um, Sellers generally are more naively optimistic and look at it from like a venture growth scale standpoint. So slightly
Got
different.
it. No,
Yeah.
that's super interesting. I'm curious, speaking of buyers, who are sort of most of the buyers that you encounter in your space? Is it individuals? Do you sort of start running into private equity? What are the types of, is it just like businesses who are looking to grow through acquisition? What does that look like?
Yeah. Um, so once you break about 2 million in EBITDA, um, you're pretty much in the PE space. This the lighter PE, but you can now access private equity. Um, and you have to be around for about a couple of years, at least 3 years. I've seen businesses that are doing 2 million EBITDA that are a year and a half old. And private equity, some private equity will touch that, but again, you've reduced the group of private equity. I like private equity because they have access to capital, right? They have limited partners who they can just call in the capital for. When you're below 2 million EBITDA, let's just say 50, 100K in EBITDA, a couple 100,000, you're generally dealing with individuals, or you're dealing with, it's not even strategics. It's pretty rare for you to get a strategic that like a strategic doesn't want to buy you that small. It depends on the size of the strategic. If the strategic is doing 3 to 4 million in EBITDA, they're going to buy someone doing 500K or less in EBITDA. But if the strategic's doing, 10, 20 million in EBITDA, or, 30, 40 million in revenue, probably not going to get something very, very small. Because again, it's going to create too much chaos in their sort of reach down. And then you get buy and hold codes, right? Companies will say, well, we focus on SaaS, we buy them even when they're smaller, and we sell them. So you have individuals, you have holdcos, you have different levels of private equity, you have search funders. Search funders, generally, it usually goes individuals, right? So if individual investors, under 1 million in EBITDA. Once you break 1 million EBITDA, you start to get into some search funds, some holdcos, and then again, light private equity. Once you break 2 million in EBITDA, you're looking at private equity, bigger strategics, and it goes up from there.
Got it. No, that's super helpful. I guess in terms of then how these buyers are financing their deals, obviously, we spoke about private equity, but how are these individuals mostly financing their deals?
Yeah, look, I'm a fan of the SBA. Like, I think any program that's allowing business owners to subsidize the ability to buy a business through a leverage buyout as an entrepreneur, I love that. I think where the SBA is difficult to work with is when they're very strict. They want clean financials, right? And if not, you have to justify why not. And they aren't very good at understanding the collateral of digital businesses, right? So they're going to go, okay, what am I actually holding against here? There are some other services that do allow you to leverage capital against, or get debt against your cash flow, but they also want you to have some consistent ARR, MRR, and low churn. So there's digital debt companies as well. But so most of the time it's debt, right? So it's either SBA, is just the biggest, and that's probably because of the internet. The internet's teaching everybody how to do SBA lending, which again I think is great. Then personal wealth, right? You'll get individuals that say, look, I have access to, I have been working really hard over the last 10 years, combined with my home IRA, slash 401k and an E-Trade or a Vanguard account. I have 5, 6, 700,000. I'm going to use some of that. And then independent sponsors, they'll say, look, I have an investor who believes in me. I just need to find the right business. Um, I've seen people get as creative as taking a reverse, mortgage on their home, right? Because they're so willing to do it. So, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You got to figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's completely right. I'm curious in terms of terms, are you seeing mostly folks, buying on the buy side, so are you seeing buyers, mostly cash up front when they're off like the terms they're offering sellers? Are you seeing like a good amount of seller financing? Are you seeing earnouts? Like what are you sort of seeing there?
Yeah, I'm biased towards cash for my clients. Uh, the deferred consideration in the form of earnouts, seller financing, whatever it may be, uh, generally is a representation of the expectation of the seller compared to the market value, as well as the health of the business. So if you have a really healthy business, I can go demand 80, 90% cash because they'll know that they're going to get that cash back in some period of time, or they could take debt against the business. The second the business starts to become younger or not fully, mature or has some issues, but the owner is still real sticky, the seller, about wanting this valuation, you start to roll in seller financing, earnouts, things like that.
I'm
So it's
sure
very
you
much,
I'm sure you hate when people or buyers come to you because they heard somewhere that they can buy a business with zero down. I'm not sure if you get that a lot, but I'm sure you get a lot. You guys don't like hearing that.
yeah, I mean, it's not the worst thing. I think it's now become made them interested in buying a business. And I think when they start to actually go deep and educate themselves, they'll quickly learn that that's, again, survivorship bias. Somebody took the one time that they bought a business with zero money down because they knew the laundromat owner and he was nice to them and like, so, but that's, again, I'm big on education. I don't judge the person. I just think it's a lack of knowledge. So I transfer the knowledge and hope that they can become rational about it.
In the
And
years that you've been doing this and knowing other brokers, how often have
Mhm.
you actually seen a deal done that was like zero down or like majority seller financed? I'm curious.
I mean, if I had to give a percentage on it, I would say 2%, less than that. It's pretty rare. Again, it's very much survivorship bias. It's happened once or twice. Here's how you do it. Um, you're more likely to get a leveraged buyout and use the SBA, which in itself is also can take time and is tough, than you are to get 100% seller financing. It's just really, really rare. I mean, think about it as you're the business owner. Put yourself in the business owner's shoes. In what circumstance would you just step away completely and tell that person, you know what, you can pay me monthly for the next 5 years? Like your kid, you would do that to your kid, you know? Maybe a neighbor that you're just really tight with or something like that. But other than that, or you're gonna have to just be as cool as, Cody Sanchez. Like, oh man, she's like so charismatic, she's killing it. I would give it to Cody. I trust her. She's online. She's got a presence. I give it to Alex Hermosi for seller financing. But so if you have a stacked resume, maybe. But other than that, it's pretty rare.
No, it's super helpful to hear from actually a broker's lens. I guess
Yeah.
speaking of, you kind of brought up your incentives a little bit, but talk a little bit about, I think a lot of people aren't actually super clear about this, but how do brokers charge sellers and what are your guys' incentives?
Yeah. We charge retainer or no retainer, and then percentage of the success commission can vary. So I charge a retainer because I've tried not charging a retainer, and I get a lot of people that are not as committed to selling the business as I, believe it or not. So I'll do work for a couple of months, 3, 6 months, and they'll go, I changed my mind. I actually was on a call this morning with someone who I'm trying to land as a client. And he goes, hey, how much is your retainer? And I told him it was 15K up front. And he goes, I just had a call from someone who said it's 2,500. I said, you're an owner. You're going to pay for what you get. So I'm the Ferrari on the lot, without a doubt. So if you think your business can be sold with a Honda Accord, go with the. I mean, I told him, I was like, you should go with that broker because you're right. You might be buying a Ferrari when you don't need it. I really care about your best outcome in the financial situation. I'm not, again, I don't hard sell my clients. I said, why don't we meet in person? We'll talk through it. And if it's a good fit, we'll continue. Most brokers don't operate like that. Most brokers are gonna, they wheel in deals. Oh, they might not, they may say no retainer, but when they do no retainer, um, they might give you a normal fee anywhere from, if you're talking $10 million, it's probably around 3, 4%. If you're talking about $1 million, it's probably 8 to 10%. And so they might say no retainer, but then when they onboard you, it's very, again, value based. It's the value addition of the onboarding, right? It's okay, get the financials. Okay, they're good enough. Okay, I reviewed them. All right, let's build, some makeshift data room, and then we'll take you to market. And then as they face problems, they'll update the data room, or they're just forwarding you questions without taking the time to understand, oh, maybe we already answered this one or not. So, retainer, no retainer, and then success fee and commission. And those are generally a representation of the quality of the broker or advisor that you're bringing on.
No, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. I mean, I think no commission must be hard, especially for you guys, like if, as we talked about earlier, if this, if the seller just changes their mind, I mean, so much wasted time.
Yeah, the difference between you going to the gym or just going with a trainer is the $60 an hour you're paying. Like with the $60 an hour, I want to make sure I work out really hard. I have an incentive to show up and do it. So it's also like in marketing, it's like a commitment to work with each other, right? It's like the coaches will sell you something for $29 and then they want to sell you something for, three, four, $5,000. That's a micro commitment in marketing. It's the same way for me. That's how I look at it. I go, if you're not willing to put up that retainer, that tells me either you don't think I'm going to do a great job, which let's talk about why you don't think that, or you're actually not ready to sell, or you want a value lower, different type of broker. We aren't going to work well with each other because I only can be devoted deeply. I don't know how to half-ass anything. Excuse my French.
No, that makes sense. I think that's a great sort of segue to my next question, which is why do so many buyers have bad experiences with brokers from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's for that reason exactly. I think you're going to get brokers are dealing with um, businesses generally under a couple of million in revenue, maybe up to 5 million. Maybe the EBITDA isn't that high. Those businesses are generally have some issue with them. They're not very polished because if they were polished, they would usually have grown a little bit more. Um, and so you get these very deep entrepreneurs who maybe aren't sophisticated at a level that is scaling. And so then the brokers represent that, right? So, I mean, if you just look at how many businesses in the United States are under 5 million or don't make it past 5 years, you'll see that it's very chaotic in that space. And so you're going to get brokers wheeling and dealing. Oh, I got to get, I gotta, get close this deal. Okay, I'll get, 60K from this one. I'll get 30K from this one. And so they very much are just wheeling and dealing, and that makes them be, I mean, it's not even 80/20 rule. It's like 60/40. They like basically like do things good enough because they can only do it that way because the business itself isn't even polished. Yeah. So, and the other thing is like good brokers become M&A advisors, right? Like I came in as a broker for the first year and I was like, oh, I'm an M&A advisor because, and I still do broker work. And the difference is the size of the business, right? The difference is what's the difference between a broker and an M&A advisor? A broker is generally dealing with smaller businesses. They are doing a little bit of everything themselves. They're the ones that marketing it. They're the ones that are reviewing the financials. They might have a team, they might not. They're part of a brokerage and it's a eat what you kill style, right? So it's very much lone wolf. I'm going to go out and crush it. They might be part of a franchise. And so again, they're very, and I hate to say this, be sort of sometimes falling out under the category myself. They have car salesman vibes. Like, okay, let's just get the deal done. It's fast and they're selling you on something. I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. I don't like receiving it. I don't like giving it off. So what you do is you sort of mature into an M&A advisor, and you go, okay, I'd rather deal with businesses that are 5 to 50 million, because it's just as much work, if not less, to sell big businesses than to sell small ones. And then the M&A advisor usually has a team that they work with, and the compensation model is a little different. You're sort of the firm itself takes on all the deals. There's not individual brokers, and it's a little bit more of a unified business there. Brokers got it hard. It's hard work.
No, completely. I'm curious, you brought up the franchises and I think we all know a lot of these brokers are part of these franchises. What does that actually mean? What support are they getting from the franchise? Like, does it mean something if someone is affiliated with one of the large like trans worlds or whatever name you name it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably what you would expect from any franchise, right? So they're getting access to some tech stack that they don't have to worry about building, right? We've built our own. They don't have to do that. They probably get access to a playbook, so copies of contracts, templates, and then they probably get a marketing playbook. Here's how you do outreach. Go to your local chambers of commerce. Do this, do that, and honestly, if it's someone is in their like late 20s to early 30s, I'd actually say it's not the worst thing to start off with, actually. Like you can go under, Trans World or First Choice, or I forget some of the other ones, and really just understand how the space works that way. And so it's a pretty standard sort of system. And then you get to say, I'm part of this. We've sold over, 50 billion last year in value, et cetera, right? Because I get that question a lot. I don't get to use, even though I am part of a group actually now, a brokerage M&A group that I really like. They're more technical. They're called the Business Succession Group. But you also get that like credibility doing that as well.
That makes sense. I guess I know we're jumping back and forth a little bit, but I'm curious from your lens, what are some of the common things that are holding deals back, that you're seeing in the deals you're working on?
Yeah, so you know, uh, once a company is listed, um, you know, so it depends on which stage of the deal, right? Again, the more polished the business is, the less risky it is, the easier every stage becomes. It's easier when we're onboarding, it's easier when we take them to market, it's easier when we're trying to close. So as again, the business becomes riskier and less polished, everything becomes more difficult. Onboarding is more difficult because we have to do more research to make sure everything is accurate. Taking it to market becomes more difficult because now we have more scrutiny and questions from buyers based off of sort of the nuance of the issues. And then when we're, taking it, signing LOIs and trying to close, um, um, that becomes more difficult. So the cleanliness of the business, for a lack of a better word, is really what creates the holdup. Let's just assume it's not, there's some issues with it. Then it starts to become the seller's expectations, right? I mean, the price. It's always the price, right? What's the saying? Like, what is a company worth? What someone's willing to pay. So, I would say that's the first thing that's sticky because if an owner came to me and was like, "Hey, I'm willing to sell it for this much," hold up, somebody will buy it and they'll buy it quickly because it's a great deal. So let's just assume now it's priced fairly. The next holdup will be access to capital from the buyer, right? The buyer going, okay, it's priced fairly. It's healthy enough. I understand the things that aren't perfect with it. Those are opportunities for me that doesn't, there's no sales and marketing. I need to put that in place. I need to get an operator, etc. Now it's okay, let me go get the capital. How do I get that? Who's going to trust me to do this with the business correctly? Let's just assume that they have access to capital. Then it's just the due diligence is generally the part that, we want to make sure we've presented everything pre-LOI, and not, to me, pre-LOI is when you're discovering everything. Post LOI is when you're confirming everything you've discovered is accurate. If you're discovering something new post LOI, I would think I've done a bad job of presenting that business for you because what I don't want you to do is start retrading and changing things after the LOI.
How often do you actually see that happen? Maybe someone does a quality of earnings or something like that, and there is some retrading happen. Is that pretty common? Not so
Pretty
common?
much, pretty much every time.
Okay. That's great.
I mean, I can't imagine a buyer just after the LOI going, it happened. That's again, that's the positive survivorship bias on the seller side, right? You'll get the LOI and you'll close in 45 days and no terms will change, right? And so that rarely happens.
I love that pretty much every time. With all that said, I guess from your lens, is it a seller's market right now? We're in January 2025 or a buyer's market?
Yeah, so it's a seller's market. right now. I feel like yeah, I mean, look, I think if it's a healthy business, there's no shortage of buyers that want it. With the Fed, holding and or reducing rates, with frankly Trump coming into a power, access to capital, based off of what was said, should become easier. And so sellers, I think, have the leverage here. Um, uh, but that's sort of my feeling on it right now. Yeah.
No, that's I mean that's certainly what I see from the buyer's lens, but wanted to definitely confirm on your end, and that makes a lot of sense. I guess let's transition a little bit to how to stand out as a buyer because we hear from a lot of buyers that they're getting ghosted by brokers. They never hear back. They call 3 times and they're just dead silence. I'm curious from your perspective, how should a buyer position themselves to stand out to a broker? What are and or even first, sort of, what are you guys looking for in a qualified buyer? What do you like to see?
Yeah. So, professionalism is always good for me, not just in the way you communicate, but the way you present yourself. Have your buying criteria or search criteria ready. So we don't waste each other's time. Be firm in that too. Say, hey, I know this is exactly what I want. This is why I want it. Because sometimes you get some buyers that are unsure. So the way you present yourself is important. Access to capital, again, that's always going to be the case. Like, are you familiar with how the SBA works, or do I have to educate you on that? Do you have access to capital yourself? Have you bought a business or sold a business before? So experience in transactions, and then experience in the industry. So I think similar to the seller, where you're sort of looking at the nuance of the business and the person, it's the same thing with the buyer. But just like the finances are what speaks highly of the seller and the business, the same thing with the buyer. But at the end of the day, this is an exchange of monies and assets. So it is a transaction. And so it is numbers generally rule that. Um, it's once those numbers are clear on both sides that you start to get into the instead of the, let's say, quantitative, you start to get into the qualitative facts. So quantitative first, show that you have access to capital, you understand SBA, you're a sophisticated buyer, and hopefully the business is healthy and you're excited about it. And then you get into the qualitative stuff, who you are, how you communicate with the broker, M&A advisor, the seller, et cetera.
No, that makes sense. And just to put things into context, how many inquiries do you generally receive on, a deal that's maybe popular or just like a good health, if you will?
Yeah, great question. So if it's really healthy, a couple of hundred. I mean, it's pretty rare we get less than 50, like at least, right? Depending on the strategy of the campaign. So we look at these as actually like they're marketing is most of what we do, right? Promoting this business to be sold initially besides negotiation and advising throughout the rest of it. But when we launch that marketing campaign, sometimes we purposely want to keep it low inquiry because they maybe don't want to go on the platforms. They don't want to be on, Biz Buy Sell, Flippa, Acquire, etc. And so, but if we like, and if it's healthy and we promote it everywhere, man, 400 inquiries.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And break down
Yeah.
sort of how many of those buyers are actually serious, qualified buyers versus just kind of like tire kickers.
You know, the first number I actually will put through that funnel is the number of buyers that reply. It's generally like 5, maybe 10%. So right away from the 300 inquiries, 30 will actually reply. The rest just don't reply. We send them over the teaser, the access, the link to sign the NDA and to view the data room. We start hounding them. We do about 8 touch points, calls, emails. We eventually move them to not interested or, close lost in the deal flow because they just are non-responsive. so you're generally getting about 30, let's say, out of the 300 who are like, oh, I'm interested, what's next? That's when we set up what's called an opportunity exploration. We say, okay, let's talk about it. If we've never dealt with them before, um, or if, even if we have, we discuss that business together. I would say usually, again, about 10% will actually do that. We'll say, okay, let me get in, let's talk about it, etc. From that, you usually cut that in about half, if not even more. So you're probably looking at, and I'll have better data on this over time. I'm big on data and I track this stuff. So as we do more transactions, more inquiries, we'll start putting out white papers for this. So you're looking at about from that 30, maybe 10 to 15 usually will be qualified. And then from there, I vet them one more time. If they're even if they're qualified from their perspective, I disqualify them. I go, hey, here's why not. They think it's good for them. I go, here's why not. There's these other people who are more qualified, and I usually will siphon it down to about five or so,
So you're presenting the seller basically five potential candidates.
give or take. Yep.
And are they always having a conversation with each of those candidates, or do you make them
Correct.
at least, yeah, before even like submitting maybe an LI or IOI, or
We go NDA data room access, opportunity exploration call, which is with me, potentially a second opportunity exploration call with me. What I don't want them to do is ask my client a bunch of questions which I already know and or I've answered on, I have the access to. Then I generally will go buyer seller meeting. I'll let them meet the seller once, sometimes twice, if for some reason that they're hitting it off and we like it. Then we generally ask for an indication of interest, an IOI, because an LOI can take some cost, and I don't want them to put cost out yet before I even know that they're within the range of what we're expecting. So we'll do an indication of interest, an IOI. And then if that looks good, we'll say, great, let's start drafting an LOI. And once we're doing that, we start to become a little bit more fluid on that. You say, okay, do we need meat on this? Do we not, etc. So it's a little bit different there.
and what is the timeline generally from, you put a deal out, like you start marketing it to a deal actually goes under LOI? Is that a pretty quick turnaround that you're seeing? What does that look like?
On average, 60 to 90 days.
Got it.
Yeah. Depends when. Like we've launched one pre-holiday. It slowed down during the holidays. Everybody was, from December 17th to January 6th, practically everybody was kind of, I mean, the real buyers were still active, which is nice. It took a little bit of time off, but so it just depends. I mean, we lost a good 20 days there or so.
What do you think's happening when I mentioned earlier that buyers are saying, hey, they reached out, they're requesting an NDA to see the sim, and they're just not hearing back. How are you sort of in, let's say, the 200 to 400 inquiries you're getting, are you sort of already selecting who gets to see the data room? What's sort of happening there?
So it depends on the business. Sometimes we are more selective to who we let into the data room. If it's a larger company, we're afraid of competitors getting in there, et cetera. For smaller businesses, it's pretty rare that your data room is going to contain something so proprietary that someone's going to come and steal it from you. That's I hate to be like the hippie about it, but that's just ego. It's just that it's rarely the case, right? Again, some cases it's valid, like you don't want your customers knowing you're up for sale. You don't want people contacting your staff. I mean, there's valid reasons, don't get me wrong. So we don't generally over protect the data room unless we need to. And then from there, yeah, once they're in there, I mean, why they stop responding, it would be, I think, the same reason why brokers will stop responding to buyers when they don't want to talk to them. They just, they're either spread thin and doing too much, and they just don't think you're qualified, and they don't want to explicitly tell you that. Um, or they think I mean, that's usually it. My feel like, why would I not reply to someone's email? Maybe this is just my style. It's pretty rare I don't reply to someone's email, even if it's like, don't email me. Um, it's like, hey, we moved on with someone else. I like all, maybe that's my, OCD, but I like all conversations closed out. I think it's a human respect thing, if I'm being honest.
No, completely. I respect the professionalism. Definitely, I feel like I hear a lot of folks who just never hear back, and it's like it's always interesting when that happens.
Yeah.
I think speaking of being qualified here, how do you generally prefer to see that qualification? I guess mostly in terms of proof of funds, right? Or what are some of the things that people can say that would make you be like, boom, that's a good buyer?
Yeah, so I mean, the golden ticket here is a screenshot of some proof of funds, right? That's like, wow, okay, cool. You have 400,000 in a IRA or in a Vanguard or something like that. Great. The more the better. Next is like a soft approval from a bank. That's nice. It's not the greatest thing. I would say like that's, like a one, if 10 is the access to funding, like liquid cash in the bank, I would say like bank approval is probably about a 6. So it does fall quite a bit. And then sort of around the 6, I would say even actually around the 8 phase, and I'm trying to skip 7. I don't like rating something as a 7. Around an 8 is like experience in buying or selling businesses. Because once I know you've done it once, you're going to just understand the terminology, and we're going to both speak about seller financing and earnouts and working capital and what that means a little bit easier, assuming you got to absorb those things during that. And then industry experience. And again, the way you show that is ideally with a buyer profile. Here's my profile, here's my website. Because we get a lot of spam too, right? So when we see someone with a Hotmail or Gmail account, we're still like, okay, this is an individual. So we already just know, okay, they're gonna be a little tougher to work with. But if we get something from like a domain, then I can visit the website really quickly and I can just see who you are and what your buying criteria is. You've now just saved you. I mean, it's like any sales process. Now I trust you a little more, right? So I'm very big on telling buyers like build a little website, put that up, put a picture of you. I've seen one that was great. It was like the guy and his kids, and this is what I did, and this is what I'm doing now. And maybe not everybody gets to do that because they have a job and they're trying to like get out of the job and not promote that to the company that they're buying something. Make a PDF, make it be really clean, and you send that with that initial inquiry. You go, fill out the form on BizBuySell, find who the broker or advisor is, and then you cold email them. Hey, I'd like to get on your list moving forward as well. Here's a little bit about me. We're looking forward to it. Um, that's the best way to do that.
No, that's super helpful. And getting more nitty-gritty, when you get an inquiry from like a biz by sell versus cold email, how do you prioritize that? And what does that actually look like from the back end for you?
Yeah, so we again are probably going to be a little different than others. We use AI agents ourselves. I've built some out again as a developer. So when it comes in from BizBuySell, we right away shoot it to our workflow, and it can see which inquiry it's about, and we then immediately email them the teaser, usually within 30 minutes. Email them the teaser, a link to sign the NDA and view the data room. I do that in one email. I don't go, here's the teaser, reply back for the NDA, then you'll get access to the data room. I'm like, why is there 3 emails being exchanged when in reality, I wasn't going to stop you. There was nothing you were going to do for me not to give you access to the data room. It's pretty rare. I'll look real quick. Does it look fraudulent? Does it look like a competitor snooping? No. Send it over. Again, even if a competitor jumps in, they signed an NDA, they signed a non-solicitation, right? They can't go to your employees. We can sue them if they do, which is rarely happens. So I just feel like the trade-off's not there. So when they inquire from BizBuySell, we move quickly because we know what listing they're interested in, but we don't get that much information about them. So, we email them, and then if they right away are like, oh, I'm not interested, we'll reply with this canned answer that's like, tell us more about you. We'll add you for future listings. Great. If they cold email and they include them more about themselves, we have a way to categorize who they are. So then we read it and we go, are they an individual? Are they part of a search fund? Are they a family office? What's their criteria? We have fields in our CRM, top industries they prefer, their experience. We go look at their LinkedIn, we enrich it. So I have all these like things that come in and bring in data about that person. We'll add them on LinkedIn. I will personally, I'll go in and say, okay, great, let me add them because I want to connect with people. And so I have this whole little sort of workflow and process when they cold email as well. And then I reply and be like, hey, I've added you to our system. I understand your minimum revenue, minimum EBITDA, maximum EBITDA, industries you prefer, etc. I'll continue to contact you as listings come on.
That's great. I mean, I feel like you're more sophisticated than 99% of business brokers. So I'm curious what you think the average broker does because I'm sure it's not that. And I'm curious, if a buyer who's listening to this, wants to reach out to, any random listing that maybe probably isn't yours, is it best for them to try to find the broker's email, call them? Like, what's the best way to actually get a hold of someone or to present yourself?
Yeah, every single way possible. So I've done that. So I had a person come to recently. They were in Washington. They had a specific type of business I couldn't service. So I went and tried to find brokers in the Washington area because my group doesn't have anybody in Washington. And they're a smaller business. And again, I tend to give attention to even the smaller listing. I mean, we're talking, I think, 300K in revenue, 100K in profit. But I thought it was a business that I think another owner would want to buy. So I contacted the business brokers in Washington. And again, I'm doing it as a seller, not a buyer, but I went and found them on LinkedIn. I added them on LinkedIn. I filled out the form on the website. I told them I have a listing that I think I would like to know if they're interested in. And then I called and left a voicemail, right? So, hey, boom, boom, boom. I'm gonna hunt you down, right? I do the same thing as a buyer. If I see a listing that you have, I'm gonna call you. I'm gonna fill out your form. I'm gonna look for you on LinkedIn. I'm gonna add you there, and then I'm just gonna until you're like get away from me, right? I'm very big on you're doing sales and marketing when you're trying to buy a business. You're going and selling yourself as the most qualified person to sell that business. If a broker is annoyed that you took that much effort, I would say that's probably because they're spread thin. That's not a representation of your process. That's just because they're like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. Well, you're overwhelmed because you aren't properly maybe financing your team correctly or whatever the case may be. You should get some help. You get a junior person or whatever. So I would just say be diligent and then email them a few times, right? I would say like once every 3 days for like 2 weeks and then once a week, two more times. I mean, you should five, six, until they're like the list, you're not qualified. That should be the answer, right? So again, what do most brokers do? I think they get the email, and depending on how busy they are or what they're doing, they might reply to it, they might not. Why they won't reply to it is they've put their expectation on some other buyers that they think are more qualified than you. So they're like, I'm already talking like three people that I think are going to do it. I think that's the worst thing to do because I'm like, you never know what's going to happen with these three people. Everybody coming in should get an equal opportunity. So again, I'm very systematic and a little bit more methodical about it. But most brokers will go, I think this person's probably going to buy it. So I'm going to ignore these leads.
That's interesting. I'm curious, when after you already sort of introduce a seller to a couple options for that, I guess, seller interview, in what situations do you actually see a seller choose a buyer that offers like a less financially sound deal, or maybe someone who's offering less upfront, let's say? What usually happens then? Do they usually just go with the 9 times out of 10, just go with the best offer? How much does that like emotional connection actually matter?
Um, the emotional connection comes into play. Uh, it's hard to sort of say. So I'll give you an example. It's more better as a scenario analysis. If someone has a better offer, let's say buyer one has a better offer than buyer two, and buyer one is just extremely hard to work with, that emotional connection is going to weigh out way heavier. But if buyer one is also a pleasure to work with, and so is buyer two, it's like, oh, they're similar in emotional connection. So now the financials are a little bit more important. So again, I wish it was like, I wish it was black and white, but it's not, right? So, I mean, I'll give you an example. So we had an offer on the kids' educational app that was for more than the offer that we ended up going through. Um, I would say the connections were the same. They were both okay people to work with and talk to, and you don't know till you get into the nitty-gritty of it. But why we went with the lesser offer is the closing period was shorter. One was a search funder, one was like a build and hold co. Um, and so it has less money, but the search funder wanted it to be under LOI for 90 days, and they still had to go and get money from their sponsors to be able to buy it. It was for more money, but the probability of it closing was not as high as someone with 45 days less money, total offer, I should say, but had access to the capital and was faster. So, you kind of go, okay. And then once those terms, again, the quantitative are similar, then you start to look at qualitative as well. It's pretty rare that it's just emotional. Oh, they were so nice to me and they were great, and that's who I mean, because the emotion doesn't last that long, especially if it's a full exit. I only have to deal, even if they're annoyed by you, I only have to deal with you for 3 to 6 months. I'm going to
That's
take the
true.
more money. If it's like a growth equity where you're going to be part of the PE, the firm or something like that, or they're buying your staff or something, now emotions matter much more. Cultural fit, who are you working with? What's their company like? So it depends on the outcome that we're aiming for.
I'm curious, as the broker, like how much do brokers actually influence who the seller ends up going with? Do sellers usually have a pretty sort of strong opinion, or do they really rely on whoever's representing them to kind of help them pick, the best buyer?
I mean, I would say 80/20. We influence it pretty much all the way. It's pretty rare for the seller to be trump the broker or the advisor. Because also it's a conversation we have together. It's not like we're just like, we know what's best for you. No, technically we're the quarterback, you're the owner of the team, right? The owner of the team is going to let the quarterback run the plays and do the thing. How often do you see the owner of the team come in and go, "No, run this play," right? Like that's kind of weird. Like you're not on the field here running these plays. So it's a degree of separation away that I think they just trust you to understand that that's the best outcome for them. And we're incentivized to do so, right? I mean, we want our money too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I mean, given your sort of commission structure, I can't imagine it would make sense to advise a seller um, on an offer that's just, financially worse for them.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't
Well,
seem to make
yeah.
sense unless it was like a certainty of close issue, as you kind of mentioned earlier. Like that would be an example, but
Yeah. Some advisors or brokers are more partial to cash at closing because they want their commission to be, you start to get into this weird space for us where if a lot of the consideration is in earnouts or seller financing, the owner starts to look at us and go, wait, if you're getting 10% of a million, but I'm only getting 500K right now, and I get another 500K over 2 years, do I owe you the 100K at closing? Well, that means I'm actually only get to keep 400K, and starts to become this dance of. So there is even sometimes where we have to negotiate with our clients. Say, look, all right, some advisors are strict. They're just like, nope, I want my 10% of the full consideration right at closing. And sometimes I do that too because I'm like, hey, this is a great, like I got you a great deal. Like you thought you were gonna get 700. I got you clearly a million, and so I deserve the full commission right away. Sometimes you make adjustments. Again, I'm a little unorthodox. I like keeping relationships with my clients and things like that. My reputation matters to me. I do this for post-economic reasons, not just for money. So, but some brokers are pretty strict about that.
no, that's super interesting to hear. I know we're way over at time, I just noticed. So no, thank you for all your time, Khaled. I guess final question.
Mhm.
Where do you think, I guess, the space is headed in the next couple of years? You're obviously very invested, you built your own company in this, business acquisition space. But so what are you most excited about, the next 5 years?
Yeah, I would say this isn't a space. I came into this space because I also thought about like, am I entering something that's going to get disrupted very quickly? I don't think so. I think even with AI and software, like you're going to generally need an M&A advisor. It's such a nuanced and intense thing that it's not like it's pretty rare the owner's going to want to do it themselves. I do think that the technology is going to make smaller deals become more sophisticated, which is nice. So with the increase in education, the ability to review financials more accurately, the ability to present things more accurately with the rise of platforms and things like that. In some cases, we might get circumvented with self-representation on some of the platforms. I don't worry about that too much because, again, at the end of the day, I'm moving up market, so I love the platforms, the guys that flip, acquire, biz buy sell. I love the platforms, but I do think the smaller deals will become more polished, which is nice. And you'll see more digital firms. I see that already. More sophisticated firms. I mean, I know it's basic, but some of the websites of the big firms just baffle my mind that they look like that. It's just unreal that these people are doing $100 million transactions. But I mean, look at Brookshire Hathaway's website. I think it looks like Craigslist still, kind of. It's so
That's
basic if you've ever.
crazy. I love that. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I guess if people want to reach out after listening to this interview, what's the best place for them to reach you?
Yeah, just livmo.com, livmo.com. You can fill out any of the contact forms on there. Go@livmo.com is our general email, or my first name, Khaled@livmo.com. I would love a LinkedIn connection and follow. And I take my content on there pretty serious. I like to add a lot of value, so check us out there.
Sounds good. Everyone go do that. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. This is great.
Thank
Really,
you.
really appreciate your time today. Thanks for going over with me and excited to see where your firm goes and continue to follow along your journey as well.
Thank you. Same for you.